The man wanted to give a female orangutan a beauty treatment, but the woman, suddenly agitated, rushed to firmly block the door, refusing to let it open. When the man made a subtle gesture, the orangutan grabbed his arm forcefully, as if to warn him not to act rashly. Fortunately, a colleague arrived in time and managed to free him, thus saving his arm. Intrigued and confused, the man watched the orangutan, who, strangely calm, had withdrawn under the bed. No one understood why she had reacted in such a way. As a safety measure, they decided to use a can of orange soda, the orangutan's favorite drink, to lure her. As they tried to retrieve the soda and open the door, the orangutan became exceptionally aggressive. She grabbed the pole they were trying to put around her neck and threw it violently to the ground. Before she rushed back to her room, they closed the door behind her. Furious, she made to attack, but stopped when she saw one of the men loading an anesthetic gun. Sensing danger, the orangutan escaped from the laboratory, running across the building at full speed. Xiao Shuai, a researcher who had worked on this project for 5 years, could not bring himself to see this creature destroyed. Filled with empathy, he decided to take the little orangutan, whom he nicknamed Xing Xing, home to protect him. He offered this singular companion to his father, who suffers from Alzheimer's disease. What no one anticipated was that the next day, when his father fed little Xing Xing, he realized that the animal was not only extraordinarily intelligent, but that his eyes had an uncanny, almost human-like depth. 3 years passed in a flash. Under the careful care of Xiao Shuai and his father, Xing Xing grew into a beautiful young orangutan with exceptional intelligence. At just a few months old, he reached the developmental level of a 2-year-old. At 8 years old, he had the intellectual level of a human child and could easily pass complex tests and elaborate tasks. Gradually, his intelligence surpassed even Xiao Shuai's own. Meanwhile, Xiao Shuai's father's Alzheimer's disease was getting worse. Desperate, Xiao Shuai secretly took samples of experimental drugs from the lab, the same ones that had been used on Xing Xing's mother. After injecting his father with the substance, he was astonished to see that the next day, his father had regained his lucidity, as if he had never been sick. Full of joy, Xiao Shuai ran to share this incredible news with Xing Xing. However, when he arrived at the attic where the orangutan used to stay, he discovered that he was no longer there. Xing Xing's sudden absence gave rise to an uneasy feeling. Xiao Shuai immediately understood that something serious had happened and started looking for him. After bringing Caesar home, Xiao Shuai noticed an injury on his leg. Worried, he took Caesar to the veterinary hospital to have the talented young doctor treat his injury. However, Caesar seemed to immediately fall under the doctor's spell and insisted that Xiao Shuai invite him to dinner. With Caesar's mischievous help, Xiao Shuai not only managed to organize a dinner party, but also got closer to the doctor, Xiao Mei, who quickly became his girlfriend. One day, while visiting Caesar's room, Xiao Mei suggested that Xiao Shuai take him to the forest more often to enjoy nature. Thus, Caesar discovered the freedom of the jungle for the first time and instantly fell in love with the environment. Since then, come rain or shine, come hot or cold, Caesar always requested his escapades in the forest, finding a sense of peace and freedom there. Fortunately, Xiao Shuai continued to watch over him carefully. But just as Caesar seemed to be thriving, Xiao Shuai's father's health continued to decline, and his Alzheimer's disease worsened. One day, in a moment of confusion, the old man went out of the house and got into a convertible that had been left open on the side of the road. Unaware of the dangers, he started the car and accidentally hit several cars parked nearby. Alerted by the noise, an angry neighbor came over to resolve the situation, but the confrontation took an unexpected turn. Seeing his father in distress, Caesar immediately intervened. He rushed to protect the old man, knocking the neighbor over in his tracks. Faced with Caesar's impressive size and strength, the neighbor was frightened and tried to flee. But he was no match. Caesar, carried away by a primal instinct, caught up with the man, pinned him to the ground, and savagely bit his finger. The screams alerted other neighbors, who immediately called the police. It wasn't long before the authorities and animal control officers arrived on the scene. Despite Xiao Shuai's pleas, Caesar was forcibly captured and taken to an animal shelter. With a heavy heart, Xiao Shuai was forced to let his companion go, consumed by feelings of guilt and helplessness in the face of this tragic situation. After Caesar attacked a human, Xiao Shuai had to comply with the laws in place. Helpless, he resolved to initiate legal proceedings to try to free Caesar. However, the court told him that he would have to wait 3 months before being able to appeal, and that Caesar would remain in detention in the meantime. Frustrated, Xiao Shuai had no choice but to comply with this decision. Meanwhile, his father's condition continued to deteriorate, forcing Xiao Shuai to put Caesar's problems aside to focus on a solution for his father. He returned to his genetics lab and tried to convince his boss to develop a new drug to treat Alzheimer's. The team tested an improved virus on Xing Xing, another orangutan, by inhaling it through a chemical device. But Xing Xing had a violent reaction to the drug and, in his panic, knocked off a colleague's protective mask. Despite Xiao Shuai's quick efforts to reinsert the tube, the colleague had already inhaled a small amount of the virus. A few days later, the effects of the virus began to show. Xing Xing showed a dramatic increase in his intellectual abilities, but the human colleague began to exhibit worrying symptoms, including incessant sneezing and bleeding. Meanwhile, Caesar, imprisoned at the animal shelter, was suffering the consequences of his incarceration and was also showing worrying symptoms. Xiao Shuai finally went to the shelter to visit Caesar. The latter, marked by scars and an angry look, no longer resembled the companion he had known. With his IQ now estimated at 180, Caesar had taken a leadership position among the other imprisoned orangutans. He gained the trust of the Black King Kong, another imposing and feared ape, by getting him to bow to him, thus asserting his authority in front of the entire group. For his part, Xiao Shuai continued to look for a solution for his father and ended up giving him an improved antivirus drug. But the human body, unable to resist the effects of the virus, reacted violently, and his father finally succumbed to an uncontrollable reaction. Guilt-ridden, Xiao Shuai turned to Caesar again, hoping to at least save him from his detention. Using his influence and ingenuity, Xiao Shuai managed to convince the curator of the shelter to release Caesar. But when he tried to take Caesar home, he was met with a surprise. Caesar, still furious at being abandoned, refused to follow him. Despite Xiao Shuai's pleas, Caesar, in a gesture laden with symbolism, slowly closed the door of his cell in front of everyone, voluntarily choosing to stay. He no longer wanted humans to decide his fate or that of his fellow humans. This courageous decision impressed the other orangutans, who applauded in respect. Caesar, determined to unite his peers around an ideal of freedom and unity, explained to them that they had to stick together because a single piece of wood can easily break, but a united group becomes indestructible. However, Caesar was not about to remain passive. Watching a guard enter a code on the door lock, he discreetly memorized the combination. In the middle of the night, he escaped using this code, crossed the passage reserved for staff, and reached the roof of the shelter. From there, he managed to escape and went directly to Xiao Shuai's house. Once in the house, he seized the modified viruses carefully stored in the laboratory refrigerator. The orangutans obediently returned to their cages, except Caesar, who remained standing outside, motionless. When one of the guards noticed his attitude, he immediately called a colleague for reinforcement. Armed with an electric baton, they went up to the guard tower of the activity zone, ready to subdue Caesar by all means. But to their great surprise, Caesar disarmed one of them with disconcerting ease, snatching the electric baton from his hands. Then, in a stunning silence, he spoke. His voice, clear and human, left the two guards speechless. Even the orangutans in their cages stared at the scene, dumbfounded. Taking advantage of the shock effect, Caesar neutralized the two guards with a precise punch and dragged them to a cage that he locked behind them. However, in the confusion, another guard, by opening the wrong door, released an orangutan. The animal, exasperated by the mistreatment suffered, violently pulled the guard off the steps and surrounded him with other orangutans to attack him ferociously. Fortunately, Caesar intervened before it was too late. Although he had taken control of the revolt, he did not give in completely to violence. He stopped the orangutans and saved the guard from certain death. But he did not stop there. With incredible strength, Caesar broke the windows of the shelter and rushed towards the city center, followed by his group. Meanwhile, a woman in the city noticed green leaves falling gently from the sky. Intrigued, she looked up and saw a horde of orangutans running like wild beasts through the streets. The group, led by Caesar, was advancing towards the genetic company, their real target. Under Caesar's leadership, the orangutans attacked the company's fortress, bypassing the security forces and entering the main laboratory. The guards, seeing the situation escalate on the surveillance screens, abandoned their post to try to contain the situation. But Caesar and his comrades had already found the cages where other captive orangutans, subjects of cruel experiments, were being held. With a gesture, Caesar ordered his companions to destroy the console that locked the cages. The imprisoned orangutans were finally freed. Among them was a one-eyed orangutan, forever scarred by human experiments, who finally regained freedom. These newly freed ones immediately joined Caesar's cause, strengthening his army. Together, they left for another place of detention, determined to save all their own. Meanwhile, the police, alarmed by the scale of the events, deployed helicopters to monitor and intervene in the area. The director of the genetic company, furious, went to the scene and ordered the police chief to capture Xing Xing, the other intelligent orangutan, whom he identified as the pillar of this rebellion. The director knew that to suppress this insurrection, it was first necessary to neutralize its leaders. I was taking pictures of a group of orangutans when a sudden movement behind me caught my attention. The trees began to shake violently. As I turned around, I saw a gigantic figure emerge from the vegetation, a huge black King Kong charging straight ahead. With a powerful gesture, it knocked down the iron fence that imprisoned the orangutans. After breaking the thick metal bars, it turned towards the group, joined forces with them, and they all fled quickly. Their escape took them to high-rise buildings which they scaled to escape the police pursuit. But in the confusion, an injured orangutan could not keep up. He was captured on the spot by animal control officers, who dragged him to their vehicle. As they were about to drive off, something unexpected happened. Caesar, observing the scene, grabbed an improvised javelin and threw it with incredible precision towards the car. The projectile pierced the hood with a deafening noise. Another orangutan then emerged from the shadows, tore off the door of the vehicle and freed the captive orangutan, despite the protests of the officers. Shortly after, 2 police cars arrived as reinforcements, their lights flashing. Without hesitation, an orangutan picked up the cover of a manhole to use as a shield, while King Kong, imposing and majestic, tore off a streetlight to use as a weapon. The confrontation was imminent. Under Caesar's orders, the orangutans continued their advance. They seized a tram heading towards the Golden Gate Bridge to go to a redwood forest. But their journey was interrupted when police cars blocked their passage in front and behind. Trapped, Caesar divided his forces into 3 groups. The chimpanzees, agile and fast, climbed the bridge's chains to bypass the obstacle from above. Another group, composed of long-armed orangutans, jumped from the bridge to reach the enemy lines from below. Meanwhile, the imposing black King Kongs advanced directly on an abandoned bus, pushing it to form a shield against police fire. The human forces, disoriented, had to cease fire in the face of the orangutan's strategic advance. As the fog thickened over the bridge, a horse suddenly appeared, galloping at full speed. On its back, Caesar stood up and gave a clear order. In a coordinated burst, countless chimpanzees burst from the heights, leaping nimbly and knocking down the human forces in their path. Simultaneously, more orangutans burst out from under the bridge, completely surrounding their opponents. Their unity, strategy, and determination made them invincible. Just when all seemed lost, Xiao Shuai ran from the back and shouted to warn Caesar. But at that moment, a helicopter appeared above the bridge and began firing indiscriminately at the gathered orangutans. Seeing the threat, Caesar leapt into an overturned car, grabbed a heavy chain, and jumped nimbly. He skillfully aimed at the helicopter, throwing the chain with incredible force. It struck the aircraft, causing the gunman and the head of the genetic company inside to stagger. But before Caesar could do anything further, the police sergeant sitting in the cockpit fired at him. Without hesitation, Black King Kong stepped in, taking the bullets intended for Caesar. Despite his serious injuries, he continued to advance, charged with rage, and attacked the helicopter directly. With a powerful blow, he overturned the aircraft, ending the threat. However, his injuries were fatal. Caesar, desperate, rushed to help him and pulled him out of the wreckage. He watched as his companion, so fierce and loyal, succumbed to his injuries. Caesar looked up and saw the person responsible for this tragedy, the boss of the genetic company, still present in the damaged helicopter. Without an ounce of hesitation, he ordered One-Eyed Dragon, an ally freed from human experiments, to act. With a kick, One-Eyed Dragon made the helicopter fall from the top of the bridge. The aircraft crashed into the river, engulfed by the waves. Caesar, leading his army of orangutans, finally crossed the bridge to reach the redwood forest, a symbol of freedom and hope. But their respite was short-lived. The police, determined to capture Caesar, continued their pursuit deep into the forest. In the darkness of the woods, Caesar found himself faced with a dilemma. A man he knew well, Xiao Shuai, was calling him to return. But One-Eyed Dragon, scarred by human experiences and filled with hatred for humans, was ready to attack. Caesar intervened just in time, forcing One-Eyed Dragon to back down. He then stared at Xiao Shuai, knowing that a crucial choice had to be made: stay with his old human friend, or lead his people to a new life. Approaching Xiao Shuai, Caesar whispered something softly in his ear. Xiao Shuai, stunned, realized that Caesar had learned to speak. The expression on his face oscillated between astonishment, sadness, and acceptance. Like a parent finally letting go of their grown child, Xiao Shuai let Caesar go his own way. Caesar slowly climbed the tallest redwood tree in the forest, watching from afar the humans he was leaving behind. As he retreated to this new sanctuary, another scene played out in parallel. A man, a member of the scientific team, spotted One-Eyed Dragon, aka Kumba, a star with a worn appearance and scarred by experiments. Seeing an opportunity, the man offered Kumba a biscuit to capture him. Wary but hungry, Kumba accepted the offering, unaware of the man's true intentions. Soon after, Kumba was strapped to an experiment table. The scientist, preparing a mask containing the experimental virus number 113 intended to treat Alzheimer's disease, forced Kumba to inhale the medicine. But things took a dramatic turn. The virus caused a violent reaction in Kumba, who struggled with unexpected strength. In the struggle, he knocked off the scientist's protective mask, exposing him to the virus. The fat man had accidentally inhaled a small amount of the virus. In less than 2 days, the boss of the genetics company summoned Kuba to the observation room. Intrigued, the fat man approached to see what was going on. To his surprise, Kuba, an experimental subject, was writing his own name. Fascinated, the boss immediately ordered new tests on Kuba. The results showed that his intelligence had increased significantly, without any negative side effects. However, an unexpected event occurred. The fat man suddenly sneezed and discovered bloodstains on the paper he was holding. Seeing the positive impact of the virus on Kuba, Xiao Shuai secretly took a sample of the number 113 virus and brought it home, hoping to use it to treat his father who had Alzheimer's disease. But his father, aware of his condition and the risks, categorically refused to be a guinea pig. Tragically, he passed away the next day, realizing that the human immune system was not as strong as that of the experimental subjects. Xiao Shuai panicked and returned to the lab to check on the fat man. Upon arrival, he learned that the fat man was on sick leave. However, he also discovered that Lao He, a colleague, had continued to conduct experiments on other subjects without his consent. Xiao Shuai, worried about the unpredictable consequences of the virus, had initially approved a test limited to a single subject. But Lao He, blinded by the virus's promising results and driven by the prospect of quick profits, had expanded the tests recklessly. When Xiao Shuai expressed his disagreement, Lao He accused Xiao Shuai of hindering their project, which caused Xiao Shuai to resign on the spot. Lao He, motivated by greed, then launched mass production of virus number 113, willfully ignoring the risks. Meanwhile, the fat man, whose health was rapidly deteriorating, desperately sought help from Xiao Shuai. He went to his home, knocked on the door for a long time without getting a response, then went around the house to try the back door. Just then, a neighbor of Xiao Shuai appeared. In a moment of panic and exhaustion, the fat man, who was bleeding profusely, accidentally splashed his blood on the neighbor's face. The next morning, the fat man's neighbor, puzzled by his unlocked door, entered his house. There, she discovered his lifeless body, a smile frozen on his face. The neighbor, who had been contaminated by the infected blood, was working as a pilot on an international flight. Unaware of his condition, he went to the airport as usual. But as soon as he entered the terminal, his nose suddenly started bleeding.